Hello and welcome to Warden Tech Talks. Today we're thrilled to welcome Leigh Engel, Senior Product Manager for Enterprise AI at NVIDIA. Leigh has had a fascinating career journey that spans roles at Apple, WPP, Ogilvy, and even internships in media and film production before transitioning into AI and product management. She holds an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management and a master's in design innovation from McCormick School of Engineering. Leigh, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
We'll start off a bit with your background. Could you share a little bit more about your career journey and what motivated your transitions across industries from media and consulting to AI and product management?
Absolutely. I feel like product management attracts a lot of interdisciplinary folks like yourself. I think you've spanned a little bit of finance, a little bit of healthcare. You got technology in there, and Debbie, co-podcaster. I know has been in fashion and brand and now technology. So my path is similarly circuitous. I got my start in AI while working at WPP, which is a communications agency. It's the largest in the world. And I was working in their data enterprise group, essentially making machine learning models to automate internal workflows. And I really liked it. I'm one of those people who got started in PM by doing it accidentally. I was making all of these automation tools for myself to be more efficient in my job. And very luckily, our CTO at the time caught a wind of what I was doing. And he said, you should come and develop that for me. You should be on my team. I'm building this thing out. I did that development more consciously and put out a few internal products, realized that I wanted to start making tools for tech companies and be a little bit closer to the critical path, to use an overused MBA term. I set my eyes on Kellogg's dual degree program where I would earn a business degree and then also a degree from their School of Engineering at McCormick. And I did that with the explicit hope of maintaining my function in PM, but doing it for a tech company where the products that I would develop would be like the main thing that the company was selling. I also, at the time, was really interested in being somewhere that had a more advanced AI strategy. I think WPP is super impressive given what their scope is, but I wanted to work for a place that was thinking primarily about what they were doing with data, and something that some of your listeners might be familiar with if they know advertising and communications is that WPP is a UK firm. We were already running into GDPR and privacy issues with the products that I was making, because any data prediction tool that you create is going to have a big data transfer and sharing component as part of that. And I realized I want to stay in this area, but I need to be working for folks who have a really forward-reaching view of where this is going to go if I want to build at a higher level. And that motivated me to go to Kellogg to get those 2 degrees. In between my first and second year, I worked at Apple, like you mentioned, on their AI/ML team, and then ended up at NVIDIA on this enterprise AI platforms squad where I get to work in between hardware and software. And even though I've only been here for about 6 months or so, I can definitely tell you it scratches the itch in terms of that forward-looking AI strategy.
Yeah, it's an incredible journey there. And I think that interest in technology seems pretty consistent as well. Take us maybe a few years back, maybe even before your MBA and your master's in design innovation, to your childhood. Where did this love for technology begin?
Oh, I love this question. If I'm being honest in my reflection, I think that what preceded my love of technology was a love of building things. I have a really strong memory of being in 5th grade homeroom at Berks. We mentioned Debbie, your co-host or fellow Wharton Tech Talk host. We went to school together, and my homeroom where we would meet every morning was inside the home ec building. It was this loft on top of the gym, and there were 10 sewing machines there. The homeroom teacher we had, her name was Miss Major. She taught a sewing class, but the advantage of being in her advisory is that you had access to the sewing machines for 15 minutes every morning before you got into the flow of your day. And I remember I wanted to understand how they worked. I wanted to use them to make things of my own. And I have this very clear memory of sewing a little pencil pouch bag with a strap so it looked like a purse. And one of my classmates in my homeroom saying, "Oh, that's cool. Can I buy that from you?" And no one had ever offered to buy. I mean, this is when you're in fifth grade. You're like, oh, you want to buy this for how much? And I got the impression that I could make something using art, and it would be worth something. And honestly, I think I just liked the attention from it. So I kept building, I kept experimenting, and that element of crafting has just been a through line in my career. I've done it in sewing. I was in, as you mentioned, entertainment a little bit when I was like reading scripts and offering feedback and writing summaries of that in Los Angeles when I was in college, and then going into advertising, having the same approach of crafting campaigns for brands. And then ultimately what I do now, product development, in some ways is the closest to sewing that bag all those years ago.
Wow. Yeah, I wouldn't have imagined that a career in tech was spurred by a sewing machine or a set of sewing machines. That's definitely the first time I've heard that association. Pretty happy to fast forward to now, right? With your time in NVIDIA, what would you say inspired you to join NVIDIA specifically? I think we talked a little bit about that, but happy to go a little bit deeper. And also talk a little bit more about how your role as senior product manager for enterprise AI aligns with your passion for building these beautiful, clever, kind, and profitable solutions.
One of the things that Jensen, leader of NVIDIA, always talks about is going after $0 billion markets. And what he means by that is finding areas where things haven't been built yet and having the creativity, the insight, the research, the education to create something immensely valuable where before there was nothing. That idea really appealed to me. And again, going back to the sewing, going back to what I did in advertising, the products and the projects that always fired me up the most were when we were thinking really creatively about making something that didn't exist before. So I knew a company with that kind of orientation was a place where I wanted to be. More specifically, when it came to the end of my MBA, I had the option of looking at a few different firms that had really interesting stuff going on. NVIDIA stood out uniquely as the place that was going to push me from a technical standpoint. Part of my background focuses on software development. That's what I was doing at WPP. When I was working at Apple, a lot of my focus was around model customization and using their Ajax model. NVIDIA would build on that by giving me the opportunity to produce software products, but within the context of the data center, which would introduce hardware into my skill set. After that, at Apple, I think my internship didn't allow me to do it all the way, but the combination of those two things of being in a place that was creative enough to make products and industries that hadn't existed before and was going to have the technical rigor to humble me and early in the process was pretty appealing.
Okay. That's pretty sweet. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the earlier part of your answer. I think lots of MBA students naturally are looking for PM roles, but a number of them also have entrepreneurial leanings. And this idea of $0 billion opportunities sounds really interesting. Just tell me a little bit more about some of the talk within NVIDIA about that. What do those opportunities look like?
The one that's closest to my work has to do with networking and networking protocols. And for those who are not intimately familiar with data center land, that has to do with the cabling that you set up in a data center that makes GPUs and CPUs talk to each other. This idea was something that Jensen was clued into long before anybody else was. And that was reflected in the acquisition of a company called Mellanox that made a product called InfiniBand. And this was like earlier in 2021-ish timeline. NVIDIA pays for this company that focuses on networking protocol. And at the time, there was a lot of chatter in the industry about this is such an overpayment and we're not exactly sure what this does. You're paying for cables, like what? But what it does and what it catalyzed was NVIDIA's climb to the top of AI because it made it so that you could link systems together and get a lot more compute, much more than you previously could. And now when you look at who has a really strong hold in AI compute, it's NVIDIA because of not only this acquisition, but this way of thinking where a prediction is made and then motion is taken. So I think about networking as like a great example of that $0 billion industry. But there are a few others as well.
Okay. Fascinating. I'm curious which of the other, and I'm sure there are an endless number of others, and when you discover one, others pop up into view as well. What would you say is one of those that NVIDIA is focused on right now? Or maybe one that you've seen that you in particular think is really promising?
Ooh, one that I've seen that's really promising. Most recently, we just released a product called Digits, and it's like a supercomputer, but for desktop. So think about like small or research teams who maybe don't have access to an entire data center. You can have this product. It's like a little brick, essentially. It's a beautiful golden brick that sits on your desk. I wouldn't say that's a perfect example of a $0 billion industry because there are different kinds of supercomputers. But when you look at the specs, this one stands out in a league of its own. And then there are more examples historically from NVIDIA. And the most obvious one being the GPU itself and the investment in parallel processing that allowed us to do a lot of what we associate with AI. Because I imagine people who are listening to Tech Talks, fellow technology enthusiasts might know this, but the idea of neural networks and artificial intelligence is not something that came about recently. This is a concept that dates back to, I think, around the 60s, but we haven't had access to the data and the computational power to execute it until now. And that's why this resurgence.
Okay. That definitely sounds like an interesting opportunity. I'd love to see one of these bricks and these golden bricks in the wild. Ideally, we do begin to see them spread. Just tying up that transition before we talk a little bit more about enterprise AI, what are some of the lessons that you've brought from your time at Apple and WPP into NVIDIA and that you hope to carry forward?
I think the biggest lesson that I took from WPP and Apple is the importance of aligning on the goal. And as a product manager, you're in typically a unique position of being a connector between a lot of smaller sub teams, or in some case, if it's a lean team, experts who converge and bring their set of skills to create something that is a product where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. But in order to do that coordination, especially when you're working at Apple, I sat next to two PhDs who were focused on natural language processing and had been doing that. They started their careers when RNNs and essentially the systems and the techniques that were ubiquitous before large language models were in play. And then they switched over their learning, they adapted, but they're so focused on their own expertise and refining their skills that they rely on PMs to make the translation of how their work contributes to the product. And the clearer you can do that and the better you can communicate it and the more skilled you get at communicating it in ways that really resonate with that set of experts, the better the products and the better the team experience. So that's something that I certainly was rougher at in my WPP days, picked up speed at Apple. And now it's just a way that I work and do business. I always start my meetings by saying, here is the goal of our product this quarter, and here is the goal of our product this week, and here is the goal for this meeting. I try to make it really clear.
That's brilliant. I think too many of us have sat through meetings that delve deep into technical details, and you emerge in a daze and wondering how it connects to the larger goal. So I think establishing all of those up front and consistently reinforcing how these ideas tie to the larger goals is really important. Sweet. So let's talk a little bit more about enterprise AI. So NVIDIA naturally is at the forefront of AI innovation. It has been for a while. It's a darling of the industry. What excites you the most about working on enterprise AI in this kind of environment?
There is so much to be excited about. It's hard to narrow it down to one thing. And I think if I imagine my favorite part, it's conceptual more than anything, but it's something I've really noticed being at NVIDIA for the past few months. When you're talking about building out the infrastructure that's required to make a data center work, you are discussing an investment that's going to last years and years and produce a lot of power and take resources to do. And I think one of the favorite parts about working in enterprise at NVIDIA is being surrounded by people who do see the mission. They see the goal, to tie it back to our former question, and they're willing to commit and build around it. I am personally a huge fan of commitment. I think that so many good things in life lie on the other side of saying yes and being all in. I know on an MBA level, that was definitely the case with how I approached recruiting, and even ending up at a place like NVIDIA. I made a list of 3 companies where I wanted to work and hustled to get in the door there. And I see that same kind of intentionality and focus with the architects on my team, with the OEMs and our partners, and with their end customers. They really believe that there is something that's on the other side of this investment, and it's going to be quite significant. And you have to do that in order to just get over the hump of building. That conceptually is what makes me really excited to come to work.
Those are the things that excite you about the work that you do, the scale of investment that's required, the argument that you make to the stakeholders that you're working with about what's going to be at the other side of that investment. Can you share a little bit more about the types of challenges that you're solving as a senior product manager?
Challenges come at every single angle. It's like you could make a list of, okay, let's start with geopolitical. What are we even allowed to send to different customers in different parts of the world? And not only the restrictions, but the volatility, how quickly one thing can change to another. You've got that. You have constraints when it comes to power and natural resources. Something that does excite me is there are so many creative solutions that are being developed for how we can be more energy efficient in the data center. Now, a lot of the conversation, or historically, it's looked like we're going to use air cooled or liquid cooled to cool down these systems that get really hot because they are very computation heavy and running. But there are also new avenues of exploring, well, oh, what if we did oil cooling? And I saw a video of this actually last week, and it's exactly what you'd expect. It's like putting a server in a tar pit, which seems so simple, but then also there's juxtaposition of the obvious with the extreme technical complexity of the server itself that's getting pulled up. That's something that we're always thinking about. Changes in demand, what people are looking for and how they're trying to build. Most recently, and top of mind for lots of people, is understanding what DeepSeek was able to release. I don't think that means, as you and I were talking about earlier, there's going to be a decrease in the need for GPUs, CPUs, and general infrastructure. It might change what people are buying and how they're buying it, and that'll shake things up. Responding to that, it's a lot of considerations. It's part of what makes the job interesting. And it's also one of the things that make it feel like a job, because none of these have obvious answers.
Yeah, I think it could be really helpful here as well to specify for all of us who are on the outside of NVIDIA looking in, are there different types of product managers? And if there are, what are the main strains and what do each of them try to focus on? Because you've mentioned quite a broad array of challenges here that require an incredibly diverse skill set. So it would be really helpful to understand how product managers are set up for success.
Yeah, product manager is one of those functions that I feel like takes on a new meaning in every single organization. I think I was actually listening to one of the former tech talks where you had Emily Bennett on the podcast from Owl, and she was saying, depending on what company you're in, product manager could mean something totally different. And I also experienced that at Apple because, for instance, and then I'll get to your question about how PM functions at NVIDIA on different teams. But zooming back for a second, if you're at a company like Apple, a lot of the PMs are reporting to marketing, and it's a huge communication function. At NVIDIA, really an engineering-driven company, that's a little bit less the case. PMs, I've actually found, are pretty consistent in function, and a lot of what we're doing, irrespective of what team you're on, has to do with setting a roadmap for what you are going to build and then executing against that. There is also a communication component. Big company of sales casts and webinars, calls where you need to be able to talk about the products that you're making. But when I look at the criteria for how I'm judged and how effective I am at my job, so much of it has to do with what did I define and how did I execute against it.
Okay, that's really helpful to understand. Okay, final question here about enterprise AI is, how do you approach balancing technical innovation with user-centric design in enterprise AI products?
part of my degree that you mentioned earlier on the engineering side focused on design innovation, the entire philosophy there was to look to your user to define what your product should include, because especially when you get into technology, there are so many smart people involved, so many brilliant engineers that could spin up 100 different features. But if it's not what your user is looking for, then they're going to fall pretty flat. Interestingly enough, though, the last two companies where I've worked, the development cycle doesn't tend to start with user. It certainly gleans inspiration from the user. In the case of Apple, there was no user who was asking for the iPhone back in 2007. There were certainly hints in the market that having a different kind of interface, having something that was more all-in-one would be really powerful. It's not like it was spun out of nothing. And that ethos has continued throughout the company. I saw it when I worked there. At NVIDIA, and this goes back a little bit to $0 billion industries, a lot of what I build on the data center team has to do with how can we take compute in the data center to the next level, whether that be through hardware or through my current product, which is essentially a set of instructions for how to do networking and cluster, which is the collection of servers and racks in the data center. Cluster bring up, because it's a complex thing to understand. My product offers a set of instructions for how to do that. And that takes compute to the next level in the data center.
Interesting. Okay. Next, we're going to move. We talked a little bit about product management, but again, these are the types of roles that lots of our listeners will be interested in, will be coming from, will be headed into. What would you say have been some of the key lessons for you trying to scale AI-driven products from ideation to launch?
I think one of the key lessons that I've learned is to be stubborn about the goal, but flexible about your methods for how to get there. A big part of my job is working with OEMs. So these are original equipment manufacturers, think HPE, Lenovo, Dell, Cisco, to name a few. And what you realize when you are creating a product that sells through partners, like many of the data center products at NVIDIA do, is that everybody has a slightly different way of doing things. You might create a server configuration or a system that not every OEM wants to support, but a few want to support it. So you can deliver it through them. And then maybe a different partner wants to focus on a different kind of system because more of their customers have workloads that align with that system more. So you lean in there, and you have to be sensitive to the cultures and the preferences of a bunch of different people. And if you're rigid about the way that your product goes to market or executing it exactly against the initial vision, you might miss some real opportunities to make that product better and to make it reach its intended audience at all.
Interesting. Where do you draw the line there? Because of course, everybody would want a configuration, right? Like a server configuration that's specific to them and makes the job a lot easier. But that sort of proliferation of standards obviously makes things more challenging from a maintenance perspective and what have you. How do you walk that very thin tightrope?
Yeah, luckily, given how mathematically intensive many of our products are, sometimes the line draws itself. There's only so much bandwidth that you can put in a certain system, or there's a requirement for building with this unified memory design, like GH200 NVL2, for instance. This is a system that has certain requirements for how it configures with the other systems that you'll put in the data center. And there are certain use cases where it would be more appropriate. If you're trying to do AI model training, you're going to need a different system set than if you were trying to exclusively do inference. Or maybe you'd have the same thing, but there's like an optimized way. So the good part is sometimes there actually is an empirical answer for what works and what doesn't. And that's great to fall back on. In my experience, I've found if you lead with that, then figuring out where to draw the rest of the line becomes easy because in most cases, your incentive is very much aligned with the partners and you both just want to produce the most compelling system that you can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You're saying sometimes the answer just gives itself, which I think it's a great place to be. So you're not forced to make that choice. But other times you do have to use your judgment, like you're saying. So I think that makes sense. Naturally, also current MBA students and soon to be MBA students are huge fans of the existing crop of large language models. I'm really curious what your approach is, just kind of talking a little bit more about AI models and technology trends now. What your approach is to evaluating some of those various models for enterprise use cases.
For sure. So I'll caveat initially by saying that my job isn't to evaluate different AI models. Most of my conversations with enterprises that happen through those OEMs focus on compute. So like what networking protocol or what memory system do I need for what types of workload? And spoiler, 90% of the time, it's an inference workload because that's the thing that most people are interested in producing right now. On a more personal level, I can say that I have my own preferences when it comes to model choice. Look, I would direct some of your listeners to, if they don't already follow, Ethan Mollick has a great guide that he releases every 6 months with 11 criteria on what models excel in what areas. That's going to be way more comprehensive than my personal choices. But for me, if I'm at work, I am mostly using a version of Llama 3.1 70B. NVIDIA is a big proponent of using our own tools, and we have our own version of a lot of different chatbots and AIs that you can talk to figure out how to do certain parts of your job more efficiently. And then beyond that, I am on Perplexity quite frequently. I know that they don't have their own model, obviously. They borrow from GPT. I think you can also Gemini in them. They're between two.
Yeah, I think they allow you to tap into a number of different models. Yeah. I find myself using Perplexity quite a bit as well. Something about their interface that really seems to work for me.
I like the citation forward approach of it. It's great. It's not a full reasoning offering, but I think that's the thing that I'm also more excited for a little bit outside of enterprise. But as reasoning models become more understood, obviously DeepSeek is the one that everyone knows right now, or that very expensive version of ChatGPT. But the whole explainability issue behind AI is something I've always thought about ever since I got into the space, again, because GDPR was such a consideration whenever I was building things early in my career. So any model that can crack that and show its work is very interesting to me. But to your original question, on an enterprise level, way more of my focus is what level of compute do you need to run a workload as opposed to, I think that Nike should use blah, 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 or Deloitte should use blah, blah, blah.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. Just to take you back very briefly, you talked about the types of loads that you're typically having to factor into your consideration, and inference being the primary one among those. Can you just maybe break down the different types of loads that do exist and maybe why inference seems to be the most common use right now?
Oh, for sure. This list could be pretty exhaustive, but you have AI training tasks, and those are pretty computationally intense. Those are going to be when you're training an entire model on data and you want the output to reflect the voice or the style of its training data. Inference, for another example, also a kind of model customization. People really are keen on inference right now because a lot of the time you can use it to train on data faster and you can get up-to-date information without doing a whole AI training or fine-tuning process again. There are also workloads that are more research specific, like if you're doing graphing work or more data synthesis tasks, and that can also quite computationally intense. But one of our more recent hardwares, the whole Grace Hopper line, is really good because it has a unified memory system. It's great for those research tasks because you're making fewer memory copies when you're trying to do something graphical. So those are to name a few.
Okay. That's helpful to know. And you also mentioned Professor Ethan Mollick. I think it's an incredible voice in the AI space. He's someone we're going to be trying to get on the podcast sometime soon. He is here at Wharton, but he's a very difficult man to get a hold of. He's in such high demand all across the world. We will try to get him on here to talk a little bit more about this.
I would be so flattered to be on a podcast that Ethan Mollick has appeared on. I think you are the CTO of Scale AI was on this too.
Yeah. I got some big hitters on here. I think maybe one of the next things I want to talk about is where you see AI going right in the future. You currently work at a leading AI company. Your career, of course, is still, I would say, very much in the ascendancy. Where do you find yourself most excited about where Gen AI and all the other infrastructure that surrounds the increased use of Gen AI and enterprise applications going? What do you find most exciting about the future of Gen AI in enterprise?
Yeah, off the bat, anything that we're doing in healthcare is so inspiring to me. Kimberly Powell does a lot of healthcare work at NVIDIA, and some of the stuff that she talks about, it's so refreshing to see her in action and to attend a session where she's speaking, because you leave with a huge sense of optimism. Close to home would be some of the work that we're doing around cancer detection using AI to identify patterns, which is what AI is great at. It's a prediction device after all. Patterns that might be a little bit more opaque to the naked eye help us catch cancer before it develops further. And we've had a couple of wins around that more recently, which is really exciting. That makes me very pumped. Also, this has been more of a strategic focus for NVIDIA in the last year, but all the stuff that we're doing around robotics, a big offering that NVIDIA has is called Omniverse. And essentially the idea there is that you build a digital world and simulation tools that can train robotics and these very physical machines to be more precise without running them through the real world. So if you follow autonomous vehicles, this is also something that's being used to train AV. In San Francisco, you can see Waymos and increasingly like Zoox and a few other companies. You used to be able to see Cruise, not as much anymore. But you can see these AVs taking to the streets. And that is partially because we have systems now where they can learn without having to drive around just by experiencing these virtual worlds. And some of the work NVIDIA is doing provides a platform to expand that beyond AV, but to different kinds of robotics and very physical tools. I find that exciting as well.
Yeah, that is pretty exciting. Healthcare, obviously, it's a major one. And I think what you've talked about in terms of getting us closer to autonomous robotics and improved robotics and autonomous vehicles by simulating these environments virtually could be fascinating as well. I'm really curious what trends or developments you think will shape the next 5 to 10 years of enterprise AI adoption. I think everyone's been talking a lot about agents. It looks like 2025 to be a big year for agents if that plays out, but there might be other trends that come up. And I'm curious where you'd place your bets on what's happening in the enterprise AI space.
Yeah, agents are obviously huge. Agentic AI is something that we're getting a lot of requests about and inquiries from the data center side of what systems can I put together to support agentic AI. I think trend-wise, these are demands that you actually are seeing from consumers and from workers. People are getting used to working with artificial intelligence and incorporating it into their jobs, even so much from like you consider where we are right now to when ChatGPT came out. I'm sure that you have adjusted some of the ways that you work being in school.
Absolutely.
Very immersed in this world. Anthropic just released their first economic index, and part of it covers how people are engaging with AI and how much they've adopted it into their jobs. I think that they found the biggest sector was people are using this to code. And as somebody who has used AI to code, it's actually mind-blowing how helpful it is, and how, especially when you're troubleshooting something and it doesn't work, instead of just going to Google and asking, why doesn't this work? And hoping that somebody on Reddit or Git has like a similar problem, being able to put it into ChatGPT and having new code spit out that you can try, huge. And I know that was a really easy thing for me to adopt, even in other parts of my job right now as somebody who's onboarding in a new position, having an AI chatbot that I can talk to understand company context, or where should I look for this particular document? It's something that is poured into my life. But I also, I talk to my boyfriend's mother, works in healthcare, and she was in the process of writing copy for a website. And she's out these AI tools and is able to onboard herself. And this is a woman who's had a 3-decade career where she hasn't ever used a tool like this before. And then now it's part of her every day. So the trend that I see is an acceleration of people getting really comfortable with this technology, incorporating it more into their workday, and then also expecting that it can do more. And I think that some of that expectation is already there right now, but AI's feet are going to be held to the fire a little bit because people have seen the opportunity.
Interesting. Just clicking a little bit further there. What do you see, or are there any opportunities around how the interfaces with which we engage with AI might shift over time to make it even more accessible? Right now, I think for most people, it's a chat client either they're interacting with. I think agentic AI would definitely change that, where there's this spiritually guided mouse that's moving around your screen and kind of doing things. What do you think about AI moving into wearables, AI that is maybe controlled by your eyes, and maybe us leaning more into using speech if Siri and code improves to the level that we now expect about ChatGPT? I'm just curious how you think we'll interact with AI differently over the next 5 to 10 years.
This is going to sound like a hot take, especially considering that this is the week where the bits of Humane's AI pin were sold to HP. But I'm actually really bullish on wearables. I think as an idea, they make so much sense. Removing the screen as a barrier to communication and interaction, I really do get where they were coming from. And I think that actually such a belief in the use case was one of the reasons that Humane fell as far as they did, because other people understand the opportunity too. They had to have. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to rally such top talent from Apple to go create this thing in the first place. I think that, especially looking forward in 5 years and certainly in 10, we will have figured out a way to make interacting with AI a lot more human. And some of the developments you also mentioned, Apple and their experience of the Vision Pro. Have you gotten a chance to put one of those on by any chance?
I have not. No, I haven't tried it yet.
It's really slick. The way that the technology responds to gestures, it feels intuitive. And this is a little bit of my optimism talking, but I think that it's backed by trend. I hope we're going in a direction where AI doesn't feel as techy and instead does feel way more human and is so good that it gets out of its own way.
Okay. So you're looking forward to unobtrusive wearables, hopefully maybe not as bulky as the Apple Vision Pros, something that feels similarly natural to use once you're actually within that environment.
Yeah, you gotta have a V1.
Yeah. It's very Ready Player One of them, but I'm hoping we can find something that doesn't require us to escape fully into that world. We can just blend it with the real world. But I am similarly excited by wearables as well, absolutely. Okay, kind of the final section here before we get to the rapid fire questions at the end, which will be fun. Looking back on your career so far, again, you've moved, I think, at an incredible pace. You've done some really amazing things. What would you say has been the most pivotal moment or decision that got you where you are today?
When I was working at Ogilvy, which is a subsidiary of WPP, and where I truly began my career out of undergrad, I was pulling these all-nighters to crunch data. And that experience is what spurred me to create my first automation tool. I created it using technology or software from a client that I was working on at the time called UiPath. They made RPA, robotic process automation. So it's really simple, and in this particular case, like low-code software that you could use to automate some of your workflows. And I spent a little bit extra time, so I made my life slightly harder and my nights slightly later in order to figure out how to automate it, but was able to see the potential fairly early. I made a conscious decision of I'm going to try to build this out so that not only I can use it, but other people can. And what if I added on an AI component and I found a way to link it into Video Indexer, which was a offering from Microsoft Azure. It was something I had to essentially make on my own time. And I had a few of my fellow analysts who expressed enthusiasm, but this was during COVID. Everybody was stretched so thin. I don't think anyone wanted to take on something else on their plate. But I'm so glad that I did and that I pushed this forward when I was in my parents' basement during that spring and summer, because once I got it to work, it spread like wildfire. And that was the product that prompted the CTO to come talk to me and recruit me to his team. It was the first time I did anything that a PM would do before I even knew what a PM
was.
And it felt so natural to put it together. I think when I reflect on that time, and I'm a big journaler, so I'm always like go through old things that I've written. And I did that a few months ago, and I looked at stuff I had put out during that time. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had a ton of doubt. I thought I was probably wasting my time, or this wasn't part of my scope. Yes, I was getting all of my work done for my regular job, but this didn't seem connected in any way to what I was rewarded doing as a consultant. But I'm just so happy I followed it through and allowed myself to go off piste a little bit, because it had a huge reward, turned my life in a new direction.
That's outstanding. So I guess you're saying people shouldn't forget their weekend projects. If you take them seriously, you never know where it might take them.
It worked for me, I'm sure. I've also iterated on a lot of stuff on the weekends that didn't amount to anything. So grain of salt with that one.
But I guess just keep swinging, follow your curiosity, I guess, and maybe something comes out of it, and if nothing does, then, at least you learned something new. Okay. What advice would you give to aspiring product managers, technologists looking to break into the AI space specifically?
I would say don't get so hung up on the shininess of your product, especially the first few products that you have. There are people who could look at what I produce and think, she works on a product that is not revenue generating and was announced via a blog post. That's not the kind of thing that I want to work on. I think especially when I was in the MBA sphere, I'm speaking quite candidly, we all knew what the hot jobs were, and it was to work on stuff that people understood and could touch and feel, even if you were working on AI. I think that products that were known in the ether had a little bit of extra luster. But I look at what I'm working on right now and my main product as, oh my gosh, how lucky am I to have a front row seat to the technology that jettisoned NVIDIA to the relevance that it has today. And there's so much to learn. I mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but that's the main thing that I feel. You can do so much just by being prepared and focused and interested in your product. And if you start there, I think you can turn anything into an opportunity.
Interesting. Okay. This has been amazing. We're going to try and close it out with some rapid fire questions. So just give a quick 1 or 2 sentence response, 1 word response if you manage it. No pressure. But if there's anything you could work on, any project you could work on outside of tech or AI, what would it be?
I'm anchored to sewing because we mentioned it earlier, but I would design costumes for Broadway shows.
Costumes for Broadway shows. Okay. What's the best book or piece of content you read recently that inspired you?
I'm reading Emily Post's Etiquette Centennial Edition. And I apologize because this is over 1 sentence, but I have to make a pitch for this. I'm big on etiquette in the workplace and life in general, especially when you're in the beginning of your career and there aren't that many ways to distinguish yourself. I'm in rooms all the time with people who are absolute experts at the top of their field and game, and I can't bring those years of expertise. But what I can do is be super on my communication and look people in the eye and end the meeting on time. All of those things really add up. And I like that this book has given me the opportunity to see more times for that in my life.
Interesting. Good pitch. What's your wildest prediction about where the tech industry will be in 10 years?
Again, this is optimistic, Leigh, but my wildest prediction is that tech isn't going to feel so gadgety. Like we were talking about earlier, I think that there's going to be a premium on things that you can tell came from a human, like a handwritten card or ways of hearing, voice, phone call, that kind of communication. I think that people are going to engage with social media really differently if it's even around at all. And the biggest contributions of tech in our world will be things that hum in the background that we don't feel day to day.
Interesting. Okay. What's the best career advice you've ever received?
To focus on your talent instead of your passion.
Talk a little bit more about that, actually.
That advice is stolen from Scott Galloway and adapted by my dad. But I think at the beginning of my career, and you might relate to this as a fellow millennial, I was always asking myself at the end of every day, but am I passionate about this? The only way I should be feeling satisfied in my job is if I'm passionate about what I'm doing. And that made it hard to appreciate a lot of the gritty day-to-day learning that's required to be an expert. It also made it so that I didn't focus on developing things that actually were pure passions, because I could just say work is my passion. And what helped me in both areas was leaning into skills that I had, going deep on those, and then having moments of feeling extremely passionate about what I do. Moments like this, where I get to be on Wharton Tech Talks and absolutely pop off about the data centers and what I'm working on. I feel super passionate being on this call, but there's a lot that I have to do in my job in order to move the ball forward that's not as exciting. And that's okay. That's just kind of part of it. And I also have appreciation for the parts of my life that are just pure passion, like going on hikes with my boyfriend or doing watercolors or seeing live music. Like I can preserve those as pure 100% happy type 1 fun things.
Gotcha. Okay. That's great. Leigh, thank you again for joining us on Wharton Tech Talks. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you again for having me.